That ramp is an eyesore, and it does not belong in this community. It is coming down whether your son pays the fines or not. And I am here to make sure you understand that. My son's attorney has already notified this board in writing that this ramp is a federally protected accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. You have no legal standing to. Homeowners Association President Martha Higgins handed the homeowner at 17 Willow Creek Drive a stack of violation notices totaling $7,200 in fabricated fines, citing his mother's wheelchair ramp as an unapproved structural modification that violated the aesthetic standards of the Oak Ridge Estates community, and told him that if the ramp was not removed within 14 days, she would place a lien on his deed with the Chatham County Property Records Office and pursue foreclosure proceedings against his home. She said aesthetically unpleasant, like it was a legal term. What she didn't know was that the wheelchair ramp was a federally protected accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act, that every violation notice she had filed against it was not just unenforceable, but potentially a federal civil rights violation, and that the moment she laid hands on his mother sitting in that wheelchair on her own son's porch, she had crossed a line that was going to cost her the presidency, her savings, and eventually the house she had lived in, while making everyone else's life miserable. Marcus Thorne, 41, a licensed physical therapist working at a rehabilitation center in Savannah, Georgia, had lived at 17 Willow Creek Drive in the Oak Ridge Estates subdivision of Savannah for 4 years. Oak Ridge Estates sat in Chatham County, a middle-class neighborhood of well-maintained single-story homes, wide sidewalks, and mature oak trees that lined both sides of Willow Creek Drive from the main entrance to the cul-de-sac at the far end. Marcus had bought his home specifically because the single-story layout and wide doorways made it suitable for visitors with mobility needs. His mother, Eleanor, was the reason he had thought about that before signing anything. Eleanor Thorne, 71, had been using a wheelchair for 3 years following a hip replacement that had not healed as cleanly as her doctors had hoped. She was sharp, warm, and entirely unbothered by her situation, a woman who had raised 3 sons on her own, and had very little patience for people who made her feel like a problem. When Marcus called to invite her down to Savannah for the summer, she packed her bags without hesitation. He installed the wheelchair ramp on the front of 17 Willow Creek Drive 2 weeks before her arrival. A standard wooden ramp, regulation width, properly anchored, positioned exactly as the ADA guidelines required, and extending no further than his own property line. Martha Higgins, 56, had been HOA president of Oak Ridge Estates for 9 years, and had built a reputation among residents that most of them described in careful language. She had a particular sensitivity to anything she deemed visually inconsistent with the neighborhood's appearance, a sensitivity she applied selectively and without transparency. She had never filed an aesthetic violation against any property. On Willow Creek Drive before Eleanor arrived, the first notice appeared in Marcus's mailbox 4 days after his mother moved in. Martha had been watching the ramp from across the street since the morning it was installed. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. And if you believe that a wheelchair ramp is never an aesthetic problem, and that no HOA president has the right to make a disabled woman feel unwelcome in her own son's home, hit that like and subscribe button and join us here on Karen Conflict. The first violation notice cited the ramp as an unapproved structural addition under Section 4.7 of the Oak Ridge Estates Architectural Guidelines. Marcus pulled up Section 4.7 that evening and found it covered fence installations and detached storage structures. It said nothing about ramps, accessibility modifications, or any addition related to medical necessity. He photographed the notice, photographed the bylaw, and put both in a folder on his kitchen counter. He did not remove the ramp. The second notice arrived 5 days later. This one citing the ramp as an aesthetic violation that was inconsistent with the visual standards of Willow Creek Drive. No specific bylaw section was cited this time. Just the phrase aesthetic violation written on official HOA letterhead with a $400 fine attached. Marcus added it to the folder and called a disability rights attorney in Savannah named Evelyn Reed, who had handled ADA accommodation cases in Chatham County for over a decade. Evelyn told him the ramp was a federally protected, reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that no HOA aesthetic preference had the legal authority to override it. She sent a formal letter to the Oak Ridge Estates Board the following week, stating exactly that and citing the relevant federal statute. Martha received the letter and filed a third violation notice anyway. The fines kept coming through the following weeks, one after another, each one with a slightly different justification and a slightly higher dollar amount. By the end of the month, the total accumulated against Marcus's deed had reached $7,200, and Martha had begun referencing lien filings in her correspondence. Marcus paid nothing and removed nothing. He forwarded every notice to Evelyn and kept adding to the folder. Through all of this, Eleanor sat on the porch most mornings, drinking her coffee and reading, completely unbothered, completely at home, exactly where she had every right to be. She had noticed Martha's stares from across the street from the first week, but had chosen to say nothing about them to Marcus because she did not want to cause him worry. She was 71 years old, and she had dealt with harder things than a neighbor with a clipboard and a grudge. Then, one Tuesday morning, Martha walked across Willow Creek Drive and approached the porch while Marcus was at work. She stopped at the bottom of the ramp and told Eleanor directly that the ramp was a violation of community standards and that it needed to be removed regardless of her situation. Eleanor set her coffee cup down, looked at Martha, told her clearly and without raising her voice that the ramp was federally protected, that her son's attorney had already confirmed as much in writing, and that she was welcome to take the matter up with the board if she disagreed, but that she would not be speaking to Eleanor about it again. Martha did not like that answer. It was a Thursday morning, and Eleanor was on the porch the same way she always was. Coffee in hand, book open on her lap, wheelchair positioned to catch the morning shade from the oak tree at the edge of the driveway. Marcus had left for work an hour earlier. The street was quiet and ordinary. Nothing about the morning suggested what was about to happen on it. Martha crossed Willow Creek Drive at 9:22 a.m. and came up the path without slowing down. She stopped at the top of the ramp and told Eleanor that the ramp was coming down, whether her son pays the fines or not, and that her presence in this neighborhood was the source of an ongoing community problem that needed to be resolved. Eleanor closed her book, set it on her lap, and looked at Martha with the calm, steady expression of a woman who had been spoken to badly before and had never once let it go unanswered. She told Martha that she had already been advised by an attorney, that the ramp was a federally protected accommodation, that Martha had been notified of this in writing, and that she had no legal standing to be on this porch making demands of anyone. Martha reached out and pushed her. It was not a shove born of a momentary loss of control. It was deliberate of Martha to put both hands against Eleanor's shoulders, enough force to tip the wheelchair sideways off the edge of the ramp. Eleanor hit the ground hard. She cried out, sharp and immediate, and the sound carried down Willow Creek Drive the way sounds do on a quiet residential street on a still morning. A neighbor 2 doors down came out of her front door within seconds. Another came from across the street. By the time 3 people had reached Eleanor on the ground, Martha was still standing at the top of the ramp. Nobody called an ambulance before they called Marcus. He arrived 20 minutes after the call while the paramedics were still with his mother. Eleanor had sustained bruising to her hip and a laceration on her forearm from the fall. She was conscious and alert and deeply angry. Marcus looked at his mother on the ground, looked at the ramp, and called Evelyn Reed before the ambulance had finished loading. Martha was still on the street when the police arrived. Martha Higgins was arrested on Willow Creek Drive the same morning Eleanor was taken to Memorial Health Hospital. The charge was battery on a person over 65, a felony under Georgia statute the 21st of May 16. it carries enhanced penalties, specifically because the victim was an elderly individual. The arrest was made based on the statements of 3 witnesses who had seen everything from their own properties and had stayed on the street until the officers arrived. Martha was photographed, processed, and released on bond by early afternoon. The HOA lanyard was not in the photograph. Evelyn Reed filed the civil lawsuit the following morning. It was comprehensive, and it was built on 3 separate legal foundations. The first was the criminal battery, and they documented injuries Eleanor had sustained. The second was the sustained campaign of fabricated violation notices targeting a federally protected disability accommodation, a pattern Evelyn characterized in the filing as a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act and a fair housing violation under federal law. The third was the emotional distress inflicted on both Eleanor and Marcus through 9 weeks of harassment, threats, and ultimately physical assault. The filing named Martha personally and the Oak Ridge Estates HOA board as a collective body for enabling her conduct without oversight. The HOA board removed Martha from the presidency by unanimous vote within 48 hours of the lawsuit being filed. They hired an independent attorney to represent the board separately from Martha and cooperated fully with both the criminal investigation and the federal ADA review that Evelyn had triggered through the Department of Justice. The board's cooperation did not save them from the civil judgment, but it reduced their individual exposure significantly. Martha's criminal defense and civil legal fees accumulated faster than she could manage them. The civil judgment against her personally covered Eleanor's medical bills, Marcus's legal fees, and damages the court described as reflecting the full severity of what she had done to a 71-year-old disabled woman on a residential porch on a quiet Tuesday morning. Her home on Willow Creek Drive went into foreclosure 14 months after the judgment was entered. The wheelchair ramp at 17 Willow Creek Drive was never removed. Eleanor used it every morning of that summer and came back the following year. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that dignity is not negotiable and that no HOA by law will ever outrank a person's right to access their own family's home, share this video with someone who needs to see it today. And if you know someone who has been targeted, harassed, or made to feel unwelcome in a place they have every right to be, tell their story in the comments. We are listening. See you on the next one right here on Karen Conflict.